Hello again and welcome back to our videos on how to texture your character. So before we continue with painting our diffuse, we'll need to have a frame of reference. For that we can export our UVW template. So opening up Edit UVWs and going to Tools and Render Template right down the bottom there, it'll bring up another pop-up. So make sure that our width and height match our texture height and our texture size, and then we can change the colors of our seams and what have you if you like. I tick off overlap, show overlap, because otherwise if you have mirrored UVs it will show up and as a big red blotch, and you don't want that. But once that's done, hit render, it'll render out in the viewport, and then you can go to save. So then just save your UV layout as something that you'll understand. So I've just saved mine as UV layout body and hit save. Make sure it's a TGA. Again, always save out your textures as TGAs unless otherwise specified. And then we can do the same for the head. So again, unwrap your UVWs, going to Tools, render texture, and making sure our height and width is the same as our texture size, and then saving it. Okay, now with that done, we can make sure everything is welded and all our smoothing groups are set to 1, or if they're all correct. So I'm just going to clear them all and set them to 1. I'm going to keep my two textures separate, my two models separate at the moment, so I keep my head separate from my body, and you'll understand why I do this later, because we'll need to render out one more map. Okay, back in Photoshop we can open up our UV layout. We can invert it by hitting Control I or going to Image, Adjust, Invert. So this will give us a basis to work with. I also set it to multiply, name it UV layout, and then lock the layer using the little padlock. So that makes it sure I can't touch it and I can't accidentally draw on it or shift it or whatever. I'll then create a new layer and I'll start to lay down blocks of color. So just using the polygon marquee tool, I select the area that I want to lay down the color, and then hit Control backspace to fill in my selection. So just selecting around the eye now and blocking in the color for that. So again, selecting it this time with the circle marquee, and again on a new layer. I'll eventually combine all these layers, but for now again I'm using the palette. So this time I go back to my concept image. I'll go to the layer palette and I'll, using my move tool, I'll drag it from my model sheet onto my UV layout. So just picking it up and dragging it to the top where the tab is and dropping it in there. So now I've got my palette there, I can lock it off and it's always there on hand. So I'll just continue around each piece of clothing and assign its own color. This will help me when I go to select them later. So I'm basically creating almost a mask type thing, and the base color of our clothing and elements as well. So you don't have to be as pedantic as I am and fill in every little gap. That's fine, as long as you fill in the area that of the pant or piece of clothing that you're working on to match whatever your concept is. So okay, just being rough, since these are on different layers, I can overlap where I need to. Eventually you don't want them to overlap, so here with the tongue, so it's going to be on top, it's not actually going over any part of the shirt or the pants or the vest. Sorry, so it's a very bright pink. We'll dull that down a bit. So just doing that for each piece of the clothing, just laying down our base colors. Okay, with our base colors laid out, I'm going to open up Max again, and this time I'm going to merge in the elements that I want. I like to do this on occasion in order to get rid of all the junk that Max sometimes likes to keep in memory. So I'm only going to select the parts that I need, so the game model and the white box model. Don't need the Omni light, so I'm just going to pick the parts that I need. So it's just the game model and the white box model. And then I'm going to hit OK, and it'll be in the scene. So there we go. This will also obviously keep our layers, so if we open up our layers palette, it'll still all be in our layers. So we can turn off the white box again and freeze it, and we can work with our game model. So I'm just going to rename it just Selena. So this is the final game model. So I've attached it. In this one, I've attached both pieces together and welded them. So this will be my final model. So I've still got that other version of my high-res character that is there, and it's in pieces for later use. But now I'm going to create the material and assign it to my character. So there I just use the eyedropper to get the material for the white box into the material editor so I can see it. And then I'm going to go down here, go into my elements section, and I need to set my IDs. So I'm going to select ID 1, and if you hit above it where it says set ID, you can set the ID. So if you have two textures like we do, you want to do that. So everything that you have in texture 1 you want to set to ID 1. For anything you want to have in texture 2, you need to set ID 2. That way we can go over here and we can set up our multi-sub material, set our number of layers to 2, and then for each ID we can assign a different texture. Okay, now since we've already got our flats laid out, or our base colors laid out, I'm just naming this Selena Body for now, Selena Body Matte. Again, you need to adhere to whatever naming convention you're given. It's always important to adhere to your naming convention. You can't call it whatever you want. If you've been given a naming convention, you need to adhere to it. Otherwise, game breakages happen and you can be in a world of trouble. Okay, so now I'm just setting up my my PSD file so that I can have everything in one and I don't get confused. So I've made two groups, one normal, one diffuse. I've then used the colors to differentiate them a little bit more. Again, you don't need to do that, but that's just for me. It helps keep things nice and neat. The groups are pretty essential though if you're going to have your diffuse and your spec and everything in the one PSD file. I've then gone and opened up all of my normal maps that I've rendered out, and then I'm going to start bringing them into this file. So for each one I'm just going to select it, Control A to select all, Control C to copy, and then back in my PSD file I'm Control V, and it'll drop it in there. And then I'm just closing each normal file that I have open as I do it. So I'm just going to go through that and bring them all in. I'm also naming them as I bring them in so that I can find them quickly and easily when I need to go, if I need to go back. So if I need to change the boots or I need to re-render my boots, I can go back, this is the boots, and I can delete that and I can bring it back in without having to turn everything on and off to try and find which one I'm working with. So I'll just continue to bring all those in. Okay, excellent. So now that all of my maps are in the same file, I can start to combine them. So now I'm going to use a nifty little action that one of the tutors here at Evoker created. And in order to combine them. So you can't just go flatten and use that as your normal map, or using overlay or one of the image blends. It tends to screw with your blue channel. And it's the blue channel that helps define the depth of your normal map. So in order to use Lucas's tool here, I need to name. I'll just collapse all this first, and I can go through it with you. I named the one that I need to merge, so I'll name this one here NRM1, NM1, sorry. And then I run the tool, or run the action. So that'll basically pull everything apart, combine everything for you, and then all you have to do is select everything and then flatten it. So Control E will merge everything together. So again, I just do that for each one. So I can only do it with 2 at a time with this tool. So I just rename it NM1. I run the action, and then I select them all and hit Control E to merge them together. Okay, so I just do that for all of my remaining normal maps in order to get them all into the one texture file. Okay, excellent. Now with that done, I've renamed the layer normal, and then I've saved my PSD file, and then I've just saved it as a TGA. So I've gone File, Save As, Selena Body Normal, and I've gone into my max so I can apply it. So in the bump channel, make sure it's set to 100, go to Normal, Normal Bump, and then select Bitmap. Then just navigate to your file. Okay, make sure it is viewable in the scene. So we need to go to Realistic here at the top here, Materials, and Realistic Materials with Maps in order to show the normal map. Now you can see that this is not displaying correctly, where it's joining or where the seams are showing up. It's darker and it's showing some, it's not viewing correctly, and it doesn't look pleasing. So we need to fix that. In order to do that, we can go up to Customize, Preferences, and then in the Gamma and LUT tab, make sure Enable Gamma is deselected. That way in our viewports, our normals will now show up correctly. Okay, and if we add a light, so just going over into the Lights tab and just selecting an Omni, so in the standard pull down, just hitting Omni. If we drop an Omni light on the scene, when we move our light around, we can see the normals react. So I'll just go over here and turn on our shadows, and I'll turn on my near and far attenuation as well. So that's just how far away from the light it is how it fades out. So as we move this around, you can see how the normals are reacting. So all those areas that have that detail are now visible. in our scene and displaying correctly, which is excellent. So she's looking pretty good. Now that we know that our normals are working correctly, we can also apply our color map. So in the diffuse color slot, select the tab there and then go bitmap and find your texture, your TGA, I should say, and apply that. So now you've got your color on top of your normals, which is great. And we can move now over back into Photoshop. We can open up our head layer and we can do the same thing for it. So again, inverting the UV, we'll have to unlock it first, so double click on it to unlock the UV map. Invert it by hitting Control I. Again, set it to multiply and locking it again using the padlock. I'm bringing over the palette again, just using the move tool and dragging and dropping it onto from the body onto the head PSD file, and then I'm just deleting the parts that aren't necessary. So I'll only need the skin and the hair for this texture file, and again locking it again so it can't be moved or accidentally deleted or what have you. And then I can go in and block in the colors like I did with the body texture. Okay, so now I'm just going to name it flats, and then I'll set up my groups like I did before. So just calling this one diffuse and setting the color to purple, and making sure my flats is inside that. I'll then create a normal layer and I'll make that one blue. So just matching what I did with the body texture, so that there's a consistency along both maps. This is because you don't always get to work on your character from start to finish. Sometimes if you're in a studio position, sometimes other artists will be working on the same model as you are. Sometimes maybe if you're away or if you're sick, something needs to be adjusted and then somebody has to go in and make that adjustment. They need to know what you've done, so they need to be able to easily find what needs to be adjusted. They need to find out without having to go through sometimes 100 layers to find this one little stitch that needs to be changed. If it's all in a layer, if it's all named, if it's all there, they can go in, and what'll take can take ages. If it's not sorted, can take seconds when it is. So you've got to think that other people are using this file as well. So you've got to keep it all neat and tidy for them to use and for them to understand. So again, with the normal maps, bringing them all into my head file and then combining them the same way as I did with the body texture. I'll then go into Max now that I've done that, and I'll apply these the same way as I did with the body texture. So this time in my head material, I make sure that my bump is set to 100, I make sure it's normal map, and then I select bitmap and I navigate to my head texture or my head normal, and then again with the diffuse color. So if I go into diffuse, go bitmap, and I select my this time I'm using a PSD file. So you can do that just while we're creating our texture. We'll eventually have to make it a TGA as well. So it just makes it easier to go back and forth between the two as we're creating the texture. It'll automatically update. Once we're finished and we've finalized the texture, we'll make it a TGA. Okay, now we're done with that. We can continue on in the next video.